We'll do a review of Lekut Sichas in Chelek Yud Zayin, the third sicha for the Parsha Kedoshim. This sicha discusses on the Parsha of the week when it talks about the various halachas. It also says that Leischale pas sodecha. A person is not permitted to cut off the edges of his field. He has to leave it for the poor person. And then the Torah also gives us another law, which is the law of leisizra kilayim, not to sow a mixture of wheat and trees in a vine, various different kilayim. And the Rebbe wants to know, and the sicha concentrates on trying to explain the order, the way the Rambam organized the laws in the Sefer Mishnah Torah. And we see that the Rambam changed it from the way the Mishnahs are organized. So like in the Mishnah, first it comes the Maseches Peah, and then comes the Maseches Kilayim. And the Rambam himself explains, why does the Mishnah have it in that order? Why first Peah and then Kilayim? Because that's the way that it says in the Torah. First it says, Leischale pas sodecha, and then Leisizra Kilayim. But the Rambam himself reverses the order. First, the Rambam has the Maseches Kilayim, and then he has the laws of Peah. That's what Rebbe is going to ask. Okay, there's also between in the Rambam, there's also the Masechta Demai, which is after Kilayim. So it comes after, which is after Peah, and then so you have Peah Demai Kilayim. That's the way the Mishnah is set up. We'll see how the Rebbe goes on. The Rebbe explains this in the very in the literal and the Pashto Pshat. The Rebbe brings down two reasonings of the Radvaz, which the Rebbe questions, is unhappy with his answers. The Rebbe comes up with a very logical answer in the order of the Rambam, but then the Rebbe goes and explains it b'pnimiyus inyonim, in the inner meaning of things, in which everything turns out to be very small. But let's go step by step. We'll start from the beginning. The Rebbe says, there's Seder HaMesechtes for Mishnayos. The orders of the tractates of the Mishnayos is Asfrier kommt Meseches Peah und noch Meseches Kilayim. Yeah, mainly we want to discuss now Peah and Kilayim, but so happens that after Peah comes the Mai, and then comes Kilayim. But we're mostly concerned now with the Peah and Kilayim, and this answer, and we'll explain in a minute why the Mai doesn't there. By the way, what is the Mai? Peah, we mentioned, that's the corner of the field. The Mai is when you buy grain from a non-chaver, an am haaretz, of an ordinary person. Then, while we have an assumption, min haTorah that Reiv Amei haaretz ma'asrin heim, that most of them do give a tithe and they take the trumas what they needed, so you can technically eat the grain. But the Chachamim answered and said that the Mai, which means the non-sure whether it was properly tithed and the obligations were taken off of the Tevuah, the Chachamim said you can't eat it. However, the Chachamim made a leniency that poor people, because it's hard for them to get their food, it's okay for them to eat the Mai. But in any event, as we'll see as we go on. So we have first Meseches Peah, Udmai, and then noch Meseches Kilayim, and then comes Kilayim. So why does the Mishnah have it in such an order? Is the Rambam Masbid. The Rambam explains the Mishnah. Why? The top of them say that. What's the reason for this order? So explain. V'sidr, the Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, or the organizers of the Mishnah, he organized Achar Peya, after Peya, he organized Mesechas Demai for whatever reason. We're not discussing it right now. See in a minute. And then Achar Demai, he set up Kilayim. So basically, that first comes Peya, and then comes Demai, then comes Demai, and then comes Kilayim. And the reason is the Rambam says Shekach Sidram Hakosu B'Seder Kedoshim Tiyu, because this is the order, the way the pasuk organized them in the parsha, in the order, the Seder of Kedoshim Tiyu. That's the parsha that we're learning now. What does the pasuk say there? Lo ischale pa'as sotcha. First, it says about Peya, don't cut off the edge of the field, of your field. And the next after that comes Sodcha L'Sizra Kilayim. Then it says in the pasuk, don't sow your field Kilayim. So first comes Peya and then comes Kilayim. Now, what is the Mai doing in the middle? So those was the Meseches the Mai, unit Meseches Kilayim kum gleich noch Meseches Peya. So why does the Masechta the Mai come after Peya? Why don't we put, like in the pasuk, we should have Meseches Kilayim to come right after Peya. So it should be in the Mishnah, should be Peya Kilayim, not Peya the Mai Kilayim. Is with the Rambam is not Masbir. The Rambam explains there, V'sider achar Peya Meseches the Mai, and the reason why after the tractate of Peya, he organized the tractate of the Mai, since the poor people have a privilege in the food of the Demai, as I mentioned, that they are permitted to eat Demai, and they have as chus in the Peya, in the corner of the field, the poor people have the corner. So the Rambam wrote first the laws of Peya, and then the laws of Demai, and then as the pasuk has, Peya, then Kilayim. Seems everything very reasonable. That's the way the Mishnah writes it. Why would the Rambam, when he writes the halachas in Mishnah Torah, why would he switch the order and put the laws of Kilayim before the laws of Peya? From Rambam in sein Sefer Yad HaChazokah. So based on this explanation, as the Rambam himself explains the Mishnah, it's surprising on the Rambam in his Sefer, the strong hand, that's the Mishnah Torah, where is Magdim, Hilchas Kilayim for Hilchas Peya, in which he comes first, brings first down the laws of Kilayim before the laws of Peya. Now, there is no Hilchas Peya directly in the Rambam. After the laws of Kilayim comes the laws of Matnasanim, Hilchas Matnasanim. And the first parts of Matnasanim is Peya. The Erste Prokim for Hilchas Matnasanim, we talk about other presents over there, but the first chapters are the laws of Peya. And so why did he put in first the laws of Kilayim and then the laws of Peya in the laws of Matzanim? Heipach from Zeir Seder in Mishnah, which is opposite in the order of the Mishnah, which is first Peya and then Kilayim. And here he writes Kilayim and then Peya. Like the Rambam allein schreibt. And the Rambam himself writes, why is the Mishnah that way? Because that was the other, and he writes it, opposite than the pasuk organized. The pasuk, it says, Pasodcho loischale pasodecho, and then says, and the Rambam writes the laws of Kilayim, then the Matnesanim, which is the laws of Peya. And the Rambam himself said that that's why Rabbi Yehuda Nossi, the Mishnah, was authored in this way. And the Rebbe says that the Radvaz zoktiv them zwei time. The Radvaz gives two reasonings. What's the order in the Rambam? Why the Rambam switched the order? And the Rebbe is going to challenge both of these reasons that the Radvaz gives. So the Radvaz, Aleph. So the number one, the first thing is the Rambam stellt Hilchas Kilayim frier der Far. Why does the Rambam write first the laws of Kilayim? Because basically, the laws of Kilayim are a follow-up to the laws that the Rambam discussed before the laws of Kilayim. So after those laws come Kilayim, and that's why he put it before Peah, because the laws in the previous halachas, which is Hilchas Orchim V'Charamim, and this would follow that. And now the Rebbe brings down what the Radvaz explains. What is the connection over there? Over there, it seems like it mentions over there in the laws of Orchim V'Charamim something which is done on the 15th day of Adar. That's what the Rambam writes in his last chapter of Orchim V'Charamim. Something which is done on the 15th day of Adar. And in the Mishnah, from where the Rambam takes what is done on the 15th day of Adar, which basically involves the laws of Hegdesh, that on the 15th day of Adar, Beis Din takes care, sends out shluchim to make sure that if people pledge, the people committed, they should pay up, etc., etc. That was done on the 15th. That's based on a Mishnah in Masechta Shkolim. In the Mishnah in Shkolim, which the Rambam doesn't bring down, it also says that on the 15th of Adar, they would start the collection of the Shkolim. So, because the Mishnah, from which the Rambam quotes the halacha in Orchim for the 15th, which relates to Hekdeshus, after Hekdeshus talks about Shkolim, that's why the Rambam found it in the Mishnah of Shkolim, after the laws of Charamim talks about Kilayim. So that's why the Rambam used the order of Kilayim after he does Orchim Charamim. Let's look inside. Maybe it's confusing, but they say because it comes with the Friedi Aloha Hilchus Orchim Charamim. In Onebs von letzten Perek, in the beginning of the last chapter of the laws from Hilchus Orchim Charamim, schreibt the Rambam, and that's what he starts off over there in the beginning. He says, "B'chamisha osur ba'ador." When it comes to the 15th day of Adar, Beis Din nifnim lechapes v'livdek. Beis Din turns to. I mean, they put their attention to search and to inspect al tzorchei tzibur, on the needs of the community. That's when Beis Din does that on the 15th of Adar, and also v'alinyone hegdeshes v'chulu, and also on the matters of hegdesh, which is Orchim V'Charamim, is person donates to his value, his erech, or cherem, he contributes to the hegdesh, to the bedekabayis. So the law he's saying, so when it comes to 15th of Adar, Beis Din goes out and starts to make sure that people pay up and that people all their commitments. So now the Rambam doesn't say anything about Kilayim on that, but this halacha that the Rambam brings down about Hekdesh comes from a Mishnah, the first Mishnah from the Mishnah in Shkolim, the beginning of Shkolim. Was there mocker from der halacha? The source of this ruling is the Mishnah Bereish Shkolim. That's the Mishnah in the beginning of Shkolim, What does it say in the first mission of Shkolim? When it comes to 15th day of Adar, Chulu, etc., then it says for the Vaisim called Tzorkei Harabi. They do all the needs of the community. Then it says the Mishnah is the Moch Messiah. Afterwards, the Mishnah concludes over there the Yotzin Af al Hakilayim, that at that time of the 15th of Adar, together we're trying to protect the people from all the different kinds of obligations and whatever Beis Din is trying to take care of the community, they would also take care of the Kilayim. What means the Kilayim? Because inadvertently, people in the winter, sometimes seeds fell into a mixture amongst the orchard, and if it's going to grow, a person might violate because it's going to grow to a certain amount, then it's going to become kilayim, and the person is going to violate the law of not to sow your field in kilayim. So Beis Din tells them to go ahead and check their fields and uproot any of the roots that are starting to sprout from the mixture and to take them out, remove them so that there will be no kilayim. So the Mishnah said, "V'yotzim afal kilayim." As Tezvav of Adar, on the 15th of Adar, like the agents of Beis Din would go out and the kilayim from the sodis, and they would uproot the kilayim from the fields. So we see that in the Mishnah, Orchin, they would Charamin, the Hekdeshes, it follows by also kilayim that they would say kilayim, and because of that. Is that Riber, the Radvas says, the first answer. Stel the Rambam Hilchus Kilayim, gleich noch Hilchus Orchim Acharabim. The Rambam places the laws of Kilayim after the laws of Arochim Acharabim. So the Rambam doesn't bring down again, just to see how difficult the answer is. The Rambam doesn't bring down about Kilayim. But because the Mishnah, the source of the beginning of the last chapter begins with the laws of the Mishnah and in Mishnah Shkolim, and in the Mishnah Shkolim it says afterwards gleich. It says Baldas in the Mishnah kum the din v'yotzim afal kilayim be'emshach zum din b'chamisha osur b'yom. There comes a kol tzorch harabim that Beis Din does all the needs above, and then it says that they also go out to kilayim. And that's why the Rambam, after he brings down that Mishnah, that halacha, part of the Mishnah starts off with the laws of Kilayim right after the laws of Orchim and Charamim. And that's why Kilayim comes before the Peah, not because we want it before Peah, but because we want to fit in Kilayim after Orchim because they're connected. But as you'll see, the Rebbe says that's a long stretch to say, write it that way. The Rebbe says logically, as the Rebbe will say, then it should really come matnas anim. The laws of Peah have more connections to the Orchim V'Charamim than Kilayim has to Orchim V'Charamim, as we'll see inside. Now, number two, the Radvaz gives another answer, base. Kilayim seinen Keulen sich kol mine Kilayim. He says, Kilayim includes a lot of very different kilayim. Yes, we started off with Sizra Zadcha kilayim, but we know a lot of mixtures are prohibited. Kol mini kilayim. There's also kilayi ilonis, various trees mixtures, kilayi zroim, various sowing mixtures, kilayi hakerem, in the orchard mixtures, kilayi harbos behemas. There is also kilayim of not mixing two breeds of animals. That's kilayim. Kilayim begodim, not in the garments. Linen and wool. Can't have that. And also, we have kilayi avodas behema. You can't have a shoyer and a chamoyer different working together. That's also kilayim. So it means basically kilayim includes various different halachas. And the Rambam likes to first talk about a more inclusive. La'olam, says the Radvaz Darkei Zal, it is the way of the Rambam to open up with things that are inclusive. Als an Inyan Kloli, because since Kilayim are a more general theme, that's why they have a precedent, they take precedent and before the laws of Peah. Peah is an Inyan Prati, that's a very individualized matter, law of Peah, and Kilayim is an expandable, it's a general rule. So the Rambam would want to first speak about Kilayim, which includes various different kinds of Kilayim, and then he talks about this specific. That's what the Radvaz answers. But the Rebbe says in Beis, we need to really look into, understand, needs a great looking into, which means very difficult in both of these answers. Number one, the Rebbe says, Aleph, the first answer, that what is the first answer? The Erste Tiritz, the first answer is Hilchas Kilayim, Kumen behemshech zum Onheim von letzten Perek, that the laws of Kilayim come as a follow-up, extension from the beginning, emphasis on the beginning of the last Perek, in Hilchas Orchim V'Charamim. And since in the laws of Orchim V'Charamim that preceded these laws, there is a follow-up to Kilayim Chamish Asor Ba'ader. So in the beginning of there, and therefore, so the Rebbe says, so to begin with, so this order is in the Mishnah. What has it got to do? The Rambam doesn't even mention it. Is noisef of them was es schwer zu sagen. In addition, it's very difficult to say, as they say that in Rambam, that the order in the Rambam is mitzad them seder in Mishnah on Shkolim, that the Mishnah on Shkolim, which mentions the law that the Rambam mentions here at the end of Orchim Shkolim, that's the reason. Over there it says first that Bezdin is the Tzorche and the Charam, the Ekdeshus, and then it says Kilayim. That's why the Rambam brings down laws of Kilayim. Isn't it moving? The Rambam says still, besides that, it's not understood. If you here, we're trying to connect it to the beginning of the last Perek. You see, if you connect it to the ideas of the end of the last Perek of Orchim V'Charamim, it would make more sense for Peah. Over there, the Rambam talks about tzedakah, about charity, and about giving, and that fits in with Peah. Peah is gifts also, rather than talking about Kilayim, which have really nothing to do with charity and with the Rambam. So why are we connecting it to the beginning of the last chapter versus the end of the last chapter, which make more sense, it would seem. So that's not understood. In Soifun letzten Perek von Hilchos Orchim V'Charamim. In the end, before we're talking about the beginning, in the end of the last chapter of Hilchos Orchim V'Charamim, the Rambam discusses V'yez dar zayin der Seder, how there needs to be the order in Mefazer Zayin, Momen Linyoni Kedusha Hekdeshus, how one should spend money for holy matters for Hekdeshus. As choches is a mitzvah, that although it's a mitzvah, this is what he writes in the end. A person should get himself used to, train himself in these matters, to give tzedakah and to give. Afal became im loy higdish chulu. If you didn't, ein bekach klum. There's no problem. Basically, don't promise and not deliver, but you should give. But if you didn't do it, there's no problem. And then there's another halacha that Rambam brings down in the end of the last chapter of Morchim. Lo yagdish odom v'lo yachrim kol nechosov. A person should never consecrate and give away to Hegdish all of his assets. And then the Rambam talks about even when you're giving tzedakah, don't spend al yifaza yesh mechemish, not more than a fifth, not more than 20% chul. So lifizeh, so we're talking about giving tzedakah, we're talking about Hegdeshus, talking about the limits. So in that case, it's adrab. If the reason why the Rambam writes the next halacha is because of its connection to the previous halacha, so on the contrary, if the Rambam will durchstellen halachas, was kommen behemshach zu hilchos orchim v'charomim, if the Rambam wants to put down halachas here, that they should follow the laws of orchim v'charomim, is doch mer mistaber, it would be more logical as noch hilchos orchim v'charomim, that after he finishes the laws of orchim v'charomim, welche endigen sich mit halachas, which conclude with laws like Pizur Mamel Yona Kedusha about spending money for holy matters. So Kuman Dafke Dilchas Matanim, it would make sense to come that they should follow. If we're trying to follow Orchim, and the end of it should follow Matanim, was as Chalosam is Hilchas Peya. The gift for the poor, that's where the first laws is Peya. So Peya should follow Orchim more than Kilayim should follow Orchim. Obefrat, especially, he says, as a Brengdor dem Din, that the Rambam also brings in the Din over there, that Nishi Hichrim Bizman Hazeh Metaltel and Stam, if a person just consecrated some objects without specifying to whom, to what he's giving it, so he says, give it to the Kohanim. Why do you give it to the Kohanim? Kohanim are usually considered to be on the poorer level in the scale because the Kohanim didn't get a part in Eretz Yisrael. They don't have a piece of the land of Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, we give them the different gifts. So giving them the Hegdesh is, to a Kohen, is similar to giving Peya to a poor person. So there's a this is similar to the idea from the gifts to the poor. Kohanim don't have a portion, an inherited land of Eretz Yisrael. That's why they take the gifts to the Kuna. One of them is the Charomim. So that's the Matnas Kahuna, that's like similar to the idea of Peya. So why would the Rambam wants to write something that flows from Hilchos Orchim? It would seem it should be Davke Matnas Anim, not Kilayim, Davke Matnas Anim, which starts with Peya, and not Unit Hilchos Kilayim, and not the laws of Kilayim. Hayos, number one, Aleph, Zekumim Behemshech Blois Zum Onek, because that follow-up is only in the beginning of the laws of Orchim V'Charomim. From letzten Perek in Hilchos Orchim V'Charomim, only in the beginning. That's what the Rambam discusses. So that would be and here we're talking about, it connects to the end of the last Perek. And Beis, the Shaykhis is Azayit Kezach. And the connection to it is something, but the Mishnah mentions it, but there's no content connection over there. Nit in etzem teichen inyan. And doesn't connect the Charomim, Orchim v'Charomim with Kilayim. There's no content connection. Whereas Orchim v'Charomim, that's unlike Nit in Etzem Techin, with the Shaykh's Tzvishin would be more than the connection that is Tzvishin Soif Hilchos Orchim v'Charomim to the end of Orchim v'Charomim. So that would make it more a flow to go from Orchim v'Charomim to the laws of Matnas Anim, the laws of Peya, on Hilchos Matnas Anim now. And that would make that would be a content sense. So that's the Rebbe has a problem with the first answer. So he says that it is because of the flow of Orchim to flows in. The Rebbe argues that Orchim v'Charomim flow better into Matnas Anim, the laws of Peya, than they flow into the laws of Kilayim. And number two, the second answer, the zweite Tiditz, as Kilayim ot adin kidima zaynik adov rakol kamamin, that Kilayim has a precedent because it includes many different types of Kilayim. And the Rebbe says Peya and Matnas Anim includes various different kinds as well. the Rebbe said that would have been okay if there was a separate law for Hilchas Peah. So, and it says Kilayim is more than Hilchas Peah. But we don't have a separate law for Hilchas Peah. We have Matnas Anim. Peah is the first one there, so that includes as well too. Well, given Atiris Maspik, that would have been a sufficient answer. Then Hilchas Peah, well, given Gishtel Bebasundarinya. If the laws of Peah would have been placed as a separate subject, lots of them by themselves. In the Rambam Ober, Kumen ze al satel von Dvarim HaKolelim. In the Rambam, they also come as part of something which is inclusive. Von Hilchas Matnis Anim, that's the laws of all the gifts to the poor. Bozayin Koil Kol Minei Matnis Anim. They include all types of gifts to the poor, which is Peah, leket to come back for the leftovers, the small sicha. If you forgot something to return, you're not allowed to leave it to the poor person. Meiser Oni, the tithing that we have to give to the poor person. Tzedakah, charity, chulu. So Matnas Anim includes a whole lot of things. Is the Chadru Kushel Leduchta. So the question now, so what are we going to deal with? We got with the question, why did the Rambam write, since we're not accepting, we don't like the answer of the Radvaz, we have to know, we have to understand what's the reasoning to the Rambam. The question comes back to this place. Why does he not place first the laws of the gifts to the poor? And that would automatically put the laws of Peah in the beginning, and then he should put the Nachil's Kilayim. He reversed the order. The Rambam writes first the laws of Kilayim, and then Matnas Anim, then the laws of Peah and Matnas Anim. If the Rambam would have done it in that way, would have written Matnas Anim first. So you'd have Peah, and then you'd have Kilayim. That would be the Sidron HaKosuf. Then it would be as the Pasuk organized. And the Rebbe answers a very balbatische answer over here in the Pshat, and then the Rebbe will explain the Penimis Inyonim. But in Pshat, the Rebbe says that perhaps the Rambam goes in the chronological order as things happen. First, we talk about sowing. That starts. And then we talk about cutting. Peah is cutting. That's right after you sow. So we start with Kilayim, and same thing as some of the other halachas. Yashleimer Gimel. Yashleimer, we can say, at the Seder in Rambam Sefer Zroim, that the way the Rambam has organized the book of Zroim is Leuten, which starts with the laws of Kilayim, and then comes Matnas Anim, is Leuten Seder for Zman Chiyuvam, is according to the order when the obligation begins, at what point, chronologically. He starts with the laws of mixture. The halachas v'midarv zeim. Those are the laws how we need to plant, how we need to sow. And then when he finishes talking about the seed, then he goes later on, because what it starts with the order, first you sow, then noch, and afterwards the halachas was an shaykh zman haktzira. Then he brings the laws that belong to the time of Karikul, which is Hilchas Peah. That's the corner of the field when you get ready to cut. And the rest of the gifts of the poor. Now, some of this have nothing to do with the cutting, but they follow already. By the way, while he's talking about these halachas of Peah, he already brings along the other gifts to the poor. The tithing that you have to give for the poor, and charity. So we have time of sowing, we have the time of cutting. Danach, the matonos was medargeben von der tvua noch miruach. Then the gifts that one has to give, the obligation of trumas and maisris, that begins after the miruach, when you set up the godish, the granary, get it all together, and you set your marechit, your it's all ready to go, all set. Then comes other obligations. There's laws of Trumas. Then comes Meiser. And then comes Meiser Sheni. And then comes Neter Revai. The fourth year, you can't do any planting. So Neter Revai is already the fourth year. So you have Trumas, Meiser, Meiser Sheni. That's all after Miruach. And the order is Trumas, Meiser, Meiser Sheni. And then you have Neter Revai, which is the planting of the fourth year. And then we have and Bikurim. Now, the Rebbe brings down that why Bikurim at the end, even though it's every year, that's not the Revai. So the Rebbe brings down from the Rambam that when he finished talking about he talked already about the fruits. So the Rebbe explains this thing, but that's in the Ha'ara of the year. Und zum Soif, and at the end, he talks about Shemitah, which is the seventh year, the Yovel, the 50th year, was kommen noch 6 Shonim Tizra Goimer, nor einmal 57 Jahr. First, you have Shemitah every 7 years, 6, and then the 7th year Shemitah, and then you have the love of Yovel, which comes after the 6th year you should sow, once in either 7 for Shemitah or once in 50 years, 50 years for Yovel, and that's the order. So all of this Roim fits in, and that's the simple explanation. But now the Rebbe goes over to explain a deeper idea over here, how this whole idea of kilayim and the idea of shkolim, it's also sort of a kilayim. You can't have the gifts from one year to bring the karbonas for the next year. There's also kilayim and soul. Let's see. Dal. Abir glatter. This is an explanation which will be smoother. Based on the inner matter of things. So we can say by first introducing the explanation, in them was the Mishnah Hanal, the Mishnah that we quoted before, that Advas brought it down, in Onev Shkolim Zokt. So what does the Mishnah say there? As be'echod ba'oder mashmim al hashkolim ve'al hakilayim. We talked about there's two parts to it. Before we talked about in the Tezvov, that's when Bezdin actually went out to collect the shkolim. Bezdin went out to uproot the kilayim. But it all started with Rosh Chodesh Adar. And Rosh Chodesh Adar, the Mishnah says there, in the beginning, the Mishnah says that there is an announcement made before. Today we do it on the Shabbos Mevorchim of Adar, or the Seeds Adar, because that's when most people are in Shul, or we do it on Rosh Chodesh Adar if Shkolim is on Shabbos, if Rosh Chodesh is on Shabbos. But in the time, in the Gemara, in the Masechta Shkolim over there, it says that on Be'echad Ba'Adar, on the first day of Adar, we announce about the Shkolim. Every year, the beginning of the month of Nisan, we brought the new karbonis from the new collection for that year. None of the money that was collected in the previous year was allowed to be used for the karbonis for the next year. The Gemara says what we did with that money, but the bottom line is we needed the new gift for the new year. So it says that be'echod ba'odar, so we want people to get ready. Everybody has to bring their shkolim. So therefore it says be'echod ba'odar mashmim al hashkolim. So we announced about people to bring the shkolim, and also bali kilayim, to remind people that they should remove the kilayim. That was before the 15 when Bezdin actually came and said ages to remove the kilayim. So the Rebbe wants to know, why does the Mishnah say first shkolim and then kilayim? Seder in Torah is not betachlis hadiyah. The order in Torah is very specific, accurately specific, has to be in that order. Isn't it move on? So it's not understood Why do we announce this announcement about the kilayim on the shkolim before the announcement of the kilayim? It seems that it will be the other way around. Kilayim is a prohibition. Kilayim, everybody is obligated. Nobody's allowed to give kilayim. Shkolim, it's a mitzvah. It's not a prohibition. You can give later. Not everybody's obligated. Women are exempt. So it seems like first, taking care of first things first. First would come kilayim and then shkolim. Kilayim is noch an isur of yedron. Kilayim is a prohibition which applies to everyone. Unan isur timidi, and it is always, not any time in the year, you're not allowed to sow kilayim. Yeder id was veist nit dem din, and therefore, a Jew who doesn't know that there is going to kilayim if it fell down, and or he doesn't know about love kilayim, is all yederega ever to sein. Every instance he can violate from love from the Caesar kilayim on the prohibition. Don't sow kilayim. Nochmer. Even more than that, you don't even have to do anything. Afilu eber tut nit kein meiser. Even if you're not going to sow it, but it fell by itself, but Yoshev bottle, you're just sitting and doing nothing, and slowly, that's the shear when it becomes kilayim, that it grew 200 times of the seed. It's 200 times as much. That's the size, the amount of growth that would make it kilayim with the other tree. So if he waited for that amount, that it grew 200 times, and he did not uproot it. He didn't do anything, but he didn't uproot it. Is there ever for kilayim? He will be violating the prohibition of kilayim. So we see you don't even have to do anything to violate. And anybody who doesn't know the halacha can get stumbling with it. Further, if you let it grow, and even if you rip it out later on, you still violated the laws of the prohibition while it grew. Uneig the akida cannot help, and also uprooting it can only help. From here on out. This does not fix the prohibition. As opposed to shkolim, is noisef of them is nit azoy chomur. It is not as severe. It's an essence the Rebbe brings down. It's only a positive mitzvah. It's not a prohibition. Is noshim v'chulu zayin nit mechuyev in them. Women, etc., are not obligated in it. Unoich di velcha zayin mechuyev in them. And also those who are obligated can give them the shkolim oich nochar Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They can give their shekels after Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Nothing's going to happen because Beis Din will give for them. Beis Din advances on the account that they will give later on. Beis Din separates for that which they are going to collect later on. And the Rebbe says, by the way, and even if you did not give a part, even somebody who doesn't give a half a shekel, he's also part of the Truma and the Korban Sibur, and this brings down from the source for that. So basically, even if you didn't do it, it doesn't mean that you didn't have a part in the Korban Sibur. It doesn't mean that you're not part of the Truma. You personally didn't do it. So it seems like the importance of kilayim is more important than the korbanos. So seemingly it should have been the announcement to kilayim before the announcement to shkolim. Why does the Mishnah say switch the order? Say first we announce the shkolim and then the kilayim. And the Rebbe will explain that things start from the Torah. They start with the shkolim, with the avodah, with the korbanos, and then we come down to the practical, to the kilayim, because the shkolim is the Torah way of not mixing things on the spiritual level of Torah. And then we also get to the kilayim, the physical in the things that grow. Hey, the Bir Bazal explaining this according to the inner matter of things. The Ramban is masbir them tam for isu kilayim. Ramban explains what is the provision of kilayim. Dur kilayim is memeshane dechuki ateva. When you mix breeds, when you mix species, you change the nature, the rules of nature. Was the Rebbe eingestellt? Hashem has set up each kind to its own. When you mix things, you are going against the laws of nature. As Zayin, the Eibishter set it up. There should be the grass, Goimer Eitz, Oisapri, they should all make their fruit lemino to its own kind. The species should be their own kind. Dafke, specifically. Same thing is by the other various different kinds of mixtures. The Eibishter made them separate. That's the laws of the nature. And when you think about it, this is also the reason of the shkolim. Der Tam von der Achroze, be'echad ba'oder ala shkolim. Why did we announce on the first day about bringing the shekels? The karbonis, what was the purpose? The karbonis tzibur von jeden Yor, because these communal sacrifices every year, davon gebracht werden davke von the shkolim von dem Yor. They must specifically be brought from the shkolim of that year. But tornit nutzin the shkolim von ein Yor. You cannot use the shkolim from 1 year, from Farish Chodesh Nisan. Those shkolim that come from before the new Rosh Chodesh Nisan, from the previous year, for the Kabonis Tzibur, from Kumendikin Yor, for the communal sacrifices of the coming year, noch Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Can't use them. We don't mix 1 year with the other. On the far is man machris bechad ba'oder. So what do we announce bechad ba'oder? Amizol geben the shkolim for 9 year. Give the new shekels because we're not going to use this year's. We're not using for next year. For 9 year for the shkodesh. And so that's also kind of not mixing. And this is in Torah not mixing, from which it branches out to the kilayim in the world. Both. Hashem looked into the Torah, and that's how he created the world. The Torah is a blueprint for the creation of the world. It's verstandig, so it's understood. As jede Sach was is do in Welt, every matter which is in this world is nicht bloß abhängig. Not only does it hinge on, und wird abgespiegelt in Torah, and it's reflected in Torah, und avodah von Yidden and the service of a Yid, nor noch mehr, but more than that. Früher ist es da in Torah. First, it is in Torah, und danach, und davon, and then later on, and from this, wird nicht in Welt, then it becomes and it evolves into the world. So you have, it's not just the Torah, Hashem manages the Torah, but it starts with the Torah, and from Torah it goes to the world. Und das ist der Hezber, and this is the explanation from Vosmis Magdim Dachroza ala Shkolim, why we introduce the announcement for the Shkolim, farder Achroza ala Kilayim, before we announce on the Kilayim. Kidei as the Anhogas Ha'olam Zol Zayin Kideboyi, in order that the world should be as it should. Laws of nature. As Ozayin Limineu, everything should be to its kind, Dafke. Nit Kilayim, nit mixture. Is as durch them, through this, was freer in their Torah, because previously in the Torah, and the instructions is men them arev. We are rejecting mixtures, to mix things up. That needs to be those items that needs to be separate. Each kind, every year needs to be separate
monies for separate korbanos. Torah starts off by saying we can't mix them. The far is based, and therefore based. Basinyonam is Torah v'ira. Their matter, what is based? There is Torah and instruction. Their matter is Torah. Torah is ira, a lesson. Frier mashmiu machris al hashkolim. First, they announce and they let people know about the shkolim. Was durch dem werd bavorn. Through this, we make sure, as the shkolim from welchem we bring the korbanos, that the shkolim from which you will bring the offerings, which is avoida, the service will take place. So genutzt werden in der richtigen Zman. It should be used in the right time. We're saying, bring the shkolim, get ready the shkolim. So that we don't mix them with the shkolim for korbanos from that zweiten year, with the shkolim and the sacrifice from a second year. What it really means also that basically brings that spiritual energy to keep things separate by first separating in the avoid the korban the shkolim, when in tiferen and breiten is in meitus, the deeper and more wider idea what it means. Bezdin is dan machriz umamshich umegala. Bezdin announces, draws down, reveals the alle koiches ruchnim was fodern sich. All of the spiritual energies that are required, lavodas Hashem, for the service of Hashem, for this coming year. Avodas. So we're preparing and we're announcing and we're bringing down the energies for the new year, because korbanos are the main service of the year. Avodas and korbanos is for the ikris de avodas in Mikdash. The service of the korbanos is one of the main services in the Mikdash. We call it avodah. Ala Torah v'ala avodah. Avodah means korbanos. And the koiches ruchnim dafen oizgenutzt werden b'meluah. These spiritual powers needs to be fully utilized in the avodah from the mizman, in the service of the time, to which they belong. People need to use the energies for the time that they belong. Cannot be, not allowed to be a mixture and a confusion. Zmanim, it can be a confusion of times in Seder Avodah B'Shal Lashana, the order of the service of year to year. We need those korbanos to be finished now. We need to have the money and we need to bring the korbanos for the next year. So we start off with Torah. And from them, this, it evolves to the announcement about the Kilayim. As euch in Welt, that also in the world, so only sein kein Eru v'Kilayim von ein min mitten zweiten. That in the world there should not be no mixture, no Kilayim from one type with another. So now the Rebbe explains the two times said before, Rosh Chodesh and on the 15th of Adar. Al pizeh that euch sein verstandig. Basically, this will also understand. Was wir gefunden die zwei Zmanim benegets Kilayim. We find two times as far as mixtures. Now that we explained this in the meaning of it, we'll see, we'll understand. We have two times. Be'echad ba'Adar is man mashmiel machriyaz ala Kilayim. On the first day of Adar, you announce and you let people know that the Kilayim, the mixture to protect themselves Kilayim. But on the 5th of Adar, the Beis Din, the Shluchim Beis Din go out also for the Kilayim, in addition to the Mishnah says the other things, like Kedoshim Charamas that they went out to collect. What is the two times? Over there, we're announcing. Announcement is to caution, but this is blois abavornish. It's a caution. When the gates of the as it pertains to giving the shekels, bekoyach. So this is a potential. We're not uprooting we're letting people know about it. We're getting them ready. So what does it take place from the shkolim? We potentially tell them about the shkolim. So how does it impact the world? Only blois the bavornish bekoyach mashmim alakom. So that's al kilayim. So at that point, it's only impacting it. At that point, only on a potential way that you announce about this, the kilayim. So both the shkolim are announced then, and the kilayim are announced. Only the achroze, a potential. When already the sun, the moon is full moon on the 15th. You had already 15 days of preparation. Unlike when the first day, when you're announcing, and the Levanish day blows b'koyach, over there the Levan is only potential in anakuda, in a point. Then it starts in actuality. They put out the tables, the shulchanim. They were actually getting down to the collections. Preparing in actuality to the giving of the shkolim, sitting by the tables and collecting. The Mishnah, that on the 15th day of Adar, there were this table that were sitting in the country. And from this, this also evolves into the conduct of the world. As also is based in, when it comes to 15, is not satisfied with the announcement, then they'll go out in Poil Mamish. We uproot the Kilayim Poil. So we see the close connection of the Shkolim and the Kilayim. Und das is the Hasbore. This is actually the explanation was B'chamisha Osir Ba'odar, that on the 15th of Adar, based in Nifnim Lechapis, based in pays attention to search and to inspect out livdoik, out tzorchei tziba v'nyonei hekdeshes, on the needs of the community and the matters of hekdesh. Kishem v'bitazvov ba'odar heitzuchon der inyan. Funachona b'poilin since hashkolim, just as in the 15th of Adar. Over there, you start the actual preparation for the giving of the shkolim, to leave the karbonis of kuvidikin for the karbonis, because of the sacrifice you have to bring the next year. This takes care and makes sure, as we said before, as the koiches was megit to leave the avoda for namashtimti yor, so that the energies, the powers that you were given for a certain year, so they should be utilized in that year. And not to get them mixed in with year to year. Then you also need to caution as far as all community needs and all kedushes. That all matters that belong to this year, so should be done before the end of the year. So now we understand how all these things work, because we're saying that it is an inspiration that comes from the shkolim. There's a mixture there. We don't want it to be mixed. And from when you start actually seeing to it not to give this year for next year, that means, so therefore, all things that need to be taken care of should be utilized and taken care of in that year, that powers of that year. The Rebbe adds now, there's also another level of mixture, and there's mixture in people who is supposed to do what. We talked about not mixing things in the world, we talk about not mixing things in the years, and now we're talking about in people not mixing. Everybody has their own avodah, not to mix them. Just as they're not allowed to be a mixture in the levels of the word kilayim from tzvei minim, to have a mixture of two types. Unshana, it can't be a year shkolim mishon l'shana. I can't mix from one year to the other year. Azoy tor'oich nitzayin kilayim in the dritter bechina nefesh. Cannot be kilayim. The third level is nefesh. For jeden einem seinen bestimmt geworden gewisse Unionen und Sachen. For each one, there have been designated certain matters and things was darf nutzen sein. He needs to utilize and sort out. Und es kann nicht sein, Kind zusammenmischen. You're not allowed to mix in von einem Berührung mit dem zweiten, from one person sorting out with the other ones. Und das ist euch Hasbore Pnimis in der Halacha. And this is also a inner explanation in the Halacha with welcher the Rambam is Messiah with which the Rambam ends the laws of Chorobim. The Rambam says you don't give away everything. Certain money belongs to you. Certain money you will have to give to tzedakah. Don't confuse this. What does it say in the Halacha? Don't give away all your assets. From everything that you have and not everything. Not all that you have. If you spread are generous with your money, with mitzvahs, but still don't scatter, don't give out, don't spend more than a fifth, more than 20%. This is connected because the money that you have, some money that Abishta gives you for your livelihood, some money that Abishta gives you for tzedakah. He needs to know as the nechosim as the assets and money that he has, seinen ihm gegeben geworden von dem Eibishter. That was given to him by Hashem, and therefore it's his money. So nutzen sie mit einer bestimmten Seder. Hashem wants him to use it in a certain order. There is a part of the money and the assets they were given to him as a deposit. They don't belong to him. Nor to only Hegdesh, they either belong to the poor person, maybe they belong to Hegdesh. And why did Hashem give it to him? Deposit, so that he should fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah, etc. Then there is the assets of money that have been designated for his own livelihood and for the livelihood of his family. And that's why you can't just spend all your money. She's not allowed to spend more than a fifth. Well, the andere 4/5, because the other 4/5 they're designated for him. Das hat der Eibishter ihm gegeben. That is, Hashem gave it to him. The parnasosu, parnasos b'nei beisai, for your sustenance and for the sustenance of your family members. You should not mix that with the part that goes to the poor person. The poor person gets his part and that belongs to your part. This is also connected, therefore, to the end of Orchin to that halacha. So now we're going to understand all the order. Pikol Anal is verstanding the Seder halachas in the Rambam. Based on all the above, we understand the orders of halachas in the Rambam. Frier in letzten Perik von Hilchos Orchim v'Charamim. Before, in the last chapter of Orchim v'Charamim, Zokter dem Din, he tells you about the halacha. As b'chamisha osar ba'oder beis din nifnu chulu, al tzorchit tzibur ba'al nyan hekdeshes. That on the 15th of Adar, beis din turns to community needs and in matters of hekdesh, which is, Bados is der inyan from kilayim beruchnis b'shana. This is the mixture of not mixing in the year, which means Beis Din wants to take care of all matters of this year that they should be taken care of this year. The Bavoranish, that is the caution, as is only Zayin, Kin Eruv, HaKoiches, they should not have a mixture of powers, as one of the Gem of Tzarchet Tzibur, Un Hekdeshes V'Shalom L'Shana. Not to mix up those powers that were given for the needs of community and Hekdesh from year to year. Don't use those funds, don't use those strength from year to year. Beis Din is trying to finish up on the 15th of Adar. Then he concludes the chapter. The notes to Los B'Sefer. The end is tied to the beginning. Euch mit der Nekuda also with the same point. How it mirrors by each individual that mixture, not the mixture, in the meaning von Orchim v'charamim, in the concept of Orchim v'charamim, nicht zum Aare sein, die Geld was gehört zu ihm, not to mix the money that belongs to you, mit die was that you have to give away. So don't give away more, just give away what you have to give away, and what you keep, you have to keep. Was es is mechatchila apikot mitzaitz. Because what you're giving away is not really yours. It's giving it away is because it was given to you to give away. It's not yours, so you can't mix but what's yours with what you give away. So that's the way that this is mirrored in the personal, in the nefesh, and by the from the person. And then from this concept of the mixture in the spiritual service of the person, that brings later on in the actual conduct of the world. Then we have the laws of Kilayim in the very literal sense. So that's why Kilayim follows. And then, okay, but one can think, okay, so important to hold on to my own. Maybe the other person doesn't deserve because he's poor and I'm rich, so maybe it's not so important. Torah tells you, the Rambam puts in the laws of Peyah, that by you might come to a mistake. Kitain is Turnus as the argument of the evil Turnus Rupas, as you bow that since the Eibishter gave you money and assets, and he made the other person for poor, you shouldn't give tzedakah. But als he seins, you're going to say everything is mine. You're not allowed to mix it in. You're not allowed to give another person. That'll make it kilayim. Is the Rambam gleich noch hilchos kilayim? So the Rambam immediately after the laws of kilayim, mamshich behilchos matnas anim. He continues the laws of matnas anim. The chiyuv to give the money that you have to give the poor person. Those who kumtim, not only pay it but everything. Now we also understand the reason for the change, the way it's written, the order of the Pasuk and the Mishnah, Frier Pei and the Noch Kilayim, and Seder Rambam, then the order of the Rambam, Frier Hilchos Kilayim, and the Noch Hilchos Matnas Anim, which is Pei V'chol. The Matnas Anim is Mudgesh, wie bloß a Chelek darf man geben zum Oni. That there's an emphasis that only a portion that you give to the poor person. Und der Leib bleibt von Balabais. And the majority remains for the owner. As you see, Peya is B'Soif Sadeh, the end of the field. But the whole field belongs to the person. Leket, Mer, Vitzvei Shibolim, if you leave more than 2 stalks, it's not Leket. So you get the most, the owner. And similar by the other gifts to the poor. But this is the inyan for shlilas kilayim beruchnis. This is the negation of kilayim beruchnis, kinal barucha, to give the poor man what he gives and not yours. As metornit ma'arav zayin, those who's get to balabais, that you're not allowed to mix in that which belongs to the owner, midam was gehört zum money to what belongs to the poor person. Und der Fun wird nicht tauschen the isu kilayim begashmis. From this, it evolves the prohibition of kilayim in physically, Kinal said before. Und the Rebbe state in Pasuk Frier, in the Pasuk it says first, lois chale pa'asadecha goimer, don't destroy the corner of the field, un ersh der noch lisizra kilayim, and then later on, don't sow it kilayim. Mishnah. Because the kilayim begashmis comes from the spiritual. So therefore, first the Torah says pasotcha, and then afterwards we say kilayim. Mashenki the Rambam with the inyan in matnas anim, but by the Rambam is trying to emphasize that you shouldn't give away everything. And metornit geben kol hashaloi, can't give everything away from welchen es wird nicht tausel isur kilayim, from which it comes the isur kilayim, that idea. Steht schon in Soif Hilchus Orchim V'Charam. So that's already written. The end of Orchim V'Charam, the Rambam writes that you can't have the kilayim. The Libra kommt Hilchus Kilayim b'hemshech tzezei. So that's why that comes as a follow-up. The Noch kommt Hilchus Matnas Aniyim, and only afterwards comes the laws of Matzanim with that Goshis Kishmom. Over there, the emphasis is, as we say it, not that you're not allowed to scatter it, nor those was given, that what you do have to give. Some money. Very careful. Saying more than all other past mitzvahs. And through this is Kisi Yisrael Miskenim Das Emes Hamedes. The Jewish throne will stand, and the true religion exists through giving. So in the Rambam, the idea of not giving, not mixing, that's taken care of in the beginning. And that starts with the origin. And therefore, we have to caution that not to give, but make sure to give, because one can think, oh, in that case, he's not going to give, as the Rebbe explained before. There is a chiyuv. There's a chiyuv to give to the poor person. But in the pasuk over there, we're talking about first the spiritual level, that not to mix, and therefore, then in the physical, this is all Mesichas Purim Tovshin Chov Dalet.